Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. We take a look at the controversy surrounding football players taking the knee at Euro 2020. The airline industry is calling for more government support, including extending the furlough. And the woman who lost her job after saying trans women are not real women has won her appeal against an employment tribunal. Plans for players to kneel at the Euro 2020 Football Championship have drawn controversy. While some see it as showing support for minority players, others say it is politicising the sport.
A recent poll says a minority of English, Welsh and Scottish fans think taking a knee at football matches is important, and about half are in support of the gesture. It was popularised by former American football quarterback Colin Kaepernick, and has been often displayed at the Black Lives Matter protests. And kneeling began at football games from the middle of last year. But some fans say it has lost its relevance and sport should not be politicised. Some fans booed when England's team took a knee ahead of some recent games, including an international friendly against Romania on Sunday. England manager Gareth Southgate says he is expecting more boos at the upcoming Euro 2020 games.
It's certainly not going to stop my support for our players and our staff. So that's it. We're going to have to live with that.
Southgate says he and his players will continue to take a knee. One Conservative MP says he's boycotting England's games because of the kneeling. And another Tory MP has applauded Scotland's footballers' move not to take the knee before their matches. Although Scotland announced on Friday they will kneel against ignorance at the match against England at Wembley. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán on Thursday defended the football fans who booed the Irish team kneeling at a game this week.
In the Hungarian cultural context, such a gesture is allowed or even expected only in 3 cases. A Hungarian man only kneels before God, before his country, and when he asks for the hand of his lover. That is the 3rd case. In all other cases, this gesture is quite simply culturally alien in Hungary.
The Hungarian Football Federation released a statement saying the national team would not kneel. Hungary is one of the Euro 2020 hosts.
In a letter to Chancellor Rishi Sunak, the airline industry body is asking the government for further economic support. The pandemic hit to their industry has resulted in billions of pounds of pre-tax losses and more than 30,000 job cuts. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the latest.
In the letter to the Chancellor, Airlines UK described the impact of the crisis as devastating. They are urging the government to extend furlough support for aviation workers until April next year. They say it will help to protect jobs over the traditionally unprofitable winter season. The airline industry body says the bulk of the £7.2 billion of government support for airlines has essentially been taken on as new debt, and no sector would be able to continue to accumulate debt in this way for much longer and hope to be able to recover. The International Travel Green List was released with few meaningful holiday destinations. The airline industry then received another blow when Portugal was removed from the list from Tuesday. Countries such as France and Greece are open to UK tourists upon conditions such as proof of vaccination and a negative test, but the government currently advises against travel to these amber list countries. In Parliament on Thursday, MPs debated support for the travel industry. Minister from the Transport Department, Robert Courts, made clear the government's approach.
And I want our people to be able to explore the wonders of the world. But we cannot and we will not rush this. And we cannot and we will not undermine our hard-won progress.
He said they would follow the vaccine rollout progress, but others disagreed with the approach.
The Minister talked about the future of the aviation sector. Well, there isn't going to be one if we don't get this resolved pretty quickly.
He went on to talk about the international travel traffic light system.
We had an approach. We had a green list. We had the Joint Biosecurity Centre recommending putting Malta, for example, on the green list. Are we flying to Malta? No. That is inexplicable, it is indefensible, and that has got to stop.
Grayling said if a country is safe to fly to, we should be flying to it. He also mentioned the amber list, where travellers need to have 2 PCR tests and self-isolate on return.
And I simply disagree with ministers who say, oh, we don't need to travel to an amber list country for a holiday or whatever. We want this industry to recover, and if people are willing to follow the rules around quarantining, they should be free to travel wherever they wish.
The travel industry body ABTA and Airlines UK are planning an event on June 23rd outside Westminster. They're calling for the return of international travel in time for the peak summer period. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Westminster, London.
Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says there is no doubt some countries are using vaccines as a diplomatic tool. But Britain does not support the so-called vaccine diplomacy.
At the G7 summit, Western leaders are discussing how to overcome the devastation caused by the CCP virus pandemic. Diplomats fear that Russia and China are using their vaccines to gain influence across the world, especially in poorer countries. Talking to the media on the summit sidelines, Dominic Raab said he had no doubt this was going on and that Britain does not support vaccine diplomacy.
There's no doubt there's some of this going about, and we don't support vaccine diplomacy, let alone blackmail. We think that we've got a moral duty, but also strong vested interest in getting the world vaccinated, because we know no one's safe until we're all safe.
Raab also said G7 leaders need to make it clear to Russia and China that they must abide by the rules and values of the international community.
I think standing up for the international order, being clear about the rules that apply, being clear about the values that apply, and being clear to both Russia and China as leading members of the international community, they must live up to their responsibilities. That's a pretty important message to come out of this G7.
The Foreign Secretary criticised Russia for its role in a string of cyber attacks against Western institutions, including hospitals. He called for the G7 to take a united stand against all such behaviour.
A woman who lost her job after claiming people cannot change their biological sex has won her appeal against an employment tribunal.
A High Court judge has ruled in favour of Maya Forstater in her appeal against an employment tribunal.
Thousands of ordinary people supported my case. And today, I'm pleased and proud to say that we have been vindicated.
The judgment says, although many might disagree with the proposition that sex is binary and that gender identity is a social construct, that is what the law of the land currently states.
No one can be forced to profess a belief that they do not hold, like trans women are women, trans men are men, and punished if they refuse.
The Equality and Human Rights Commission and Index on Censorship both intervened in support of the view that gender-critical beliefs are protected by law.
Beijing has broken its legal obligations by undermining Hong Kong's autonomy, according to a government report. Dominic Raab says China used a national security law to drastically curtail freedoms.
British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab took aim at Beijing for undermining the autonomy of Hong Kong in a blistering report delivered on Thursday. He criticised a national security law imposed by China on the former British colony, used to drastically curtail freedoms and stifle political opposition. Raab said there had been clear breaches of the 1984 joint declaration signed by both China and Britain that guaranteed wide-ranging freedoms for Hong Kong. That declaration paved the way for the handover of Hong Kong back to China a little over a decade later. He also singled out the overhaul of the region's electoral system and prosecution decisions made by the Department of Justice. The Hong Kong government has hit back at what it describes as inaccurate remarks that could not be further from the truth and are clearly double standards. The security law, which was introduced in June last year, punishes what authorities broadly define as secession, sedition and collusion with foreign forces with up to life in prison.
Amnesty International says the Chinese authorities have created a dystopian hellscape on a staggering scale. Their latest report on Xinjiang says hundreds of thousands of Muslims are suffering mass internment and torture.
Amnesty International says the Chinese regime commits crimes against humanity in Xinjiang. Hundreds of thousands of Muslim minorities are subject to mass internment and torture, Amnesty says in a report released this week. Millions more are under mass surveillance. The report says hundreds of thousands have been sent to prison in the past 4 years, and up to 1 million people have been sent to internment camps. Amnesty says every former detainee they interviewed suffered torture and other ill treatment. This includes physical torture in the form of beatings, electric shocks, solitary confinement, deprivation of food, water and sleep, and exposure to extreme cold. Torture tools like tiger chairs were also used. The 160-page report is based on new testimonies from more than 50 former camp detainees. Amnesty International's Secretary-General Agnes Callamard says the Chinese authorities have created a dystopian hellscape on a staggering scale. She's calling on the UN to urgently investigate.
Consumers returning to high street stores and visiting their hairdressers helped the UK economy grow at its fastest rate since July 2020. The Office for National Statistics says gross domestic product, or GDP, was at 2.3% in April as lockdown restrictions eased. Chancellor Rishi Sunak says today's figures are a promising sign that our economy is beginning to recover. And in other news, is mining in Cornwall about to boom again? The demand for metals for electronics and batteries has many in the country believing mines that have been closed for decades could be reopened.
A Cornish mining company is leading the charge to revive a centuries-old industry that collapsed along with the price of tin in the 1980s. At that time, tin was trading at just a few £100 per tonne, as opposed to around £21,000 per tonne today.
We think we're at the start of what we would call a technology age, and there's an opportunity here for Cornwall to participate in that and to supply tin to the UK needs and Europe's needs, because there really aren't any domestic tin producers, well, none in the UK. There's some byproduct tin in Spain and Portugal, and there's no tin production in North America either.
Cornish Metals say their South Crofty mine at Red Ruth, which operated for over 400 years until it closed in 1998, has reserves of tin much greater than previously thought.
So the next step for us, obviously the mine workings today are flooded, is to dewater the mine and get access to the lower, what we call the tin-only resource, and get the mine back into production.
Global demand for lithium, a metal used in the production of batteries, has boomed with the growth in demand for electric cars and mobile devices. It is found in the geothermal waters bubbling up in the granite rocks of Cornwall. A company called Cornish Lithium is currently testing methods to extract the lithium.
There's a huge amount of work that the mineral exploration industry needs to do to find enough lithium, to find new sources of lithium to actually be able to, fuel that supply.
Cornish Lithium plans to create a local lithium supply chain for the UK automotive market.
The government has announced a new rail pass for domestic holidaymakers to boost the recovery of domestic tourism. The pass will be launched later this year and similar to the Brit Rail Pass, which entitles international visitors to unlimited train travel in Britain. The new pass is part of the government's tourism recovery plan to encourage trips after the peak summer season. The government will also consult on a registration scheme for tourist accommodation, which would include short-term rentals such as those booked through Airbnb. Still to come, Germany's vaccine regulator is not recommending the use of the Pfizer vaccine for 12 to 17-year-olds without pre-existing conditions. Find out more after the break.